Okay, we're back. Baer Faxt live from London. First of all, thank you to Frieze for giving us a facility to film in. Thank you to Ursula. 10 issues of great contemporary art and magazine. How's it worth? We're there. And we're joined by one of the leading lights on the London gallery scene, Alma Luxembourg.
Thank you so
Partner,
much.
Luxembourg Co. So let's get right into some issues of Frieze. You're on the, I guess, the selection committee for Frieze Masters.
I am.
Tell us about that.
Well, Frieze Masters is just such an interesting and unique fair, I think. It's so diverse from, porcelain and arms and armor and, antiquities all the way to more contemporary art. It's just the breadth of it is so interesting. And I like it because it's a fair that forces you a little bit to look more slowly. It forces you to kind of see things which are maybe unexpected or maybe you don't know much about, and draws out links between different disciplines, which is so nice.
Do you think having two fairs, the same company, but a 15-minute walk apart makes you slow down a little bit because you've had to march that way, catch your breath?
Catch your breath. Yes, I mean, I think they're very much linked in a certain way, not just by their proximity, but actually because really Frieze Masters is sort of looking at the old through the new in many ways. This year, for example, there were tours of the fair led by contemporary artists. There's often quite a lot of link between the fairs, even in terms of content. So,
when was the first time you showed at Frieze Masters?
I try to think back. I think it's been more or less since we opened the gallery in London. So it must be around 2011, 2012, something like that. More or less when it started. I don't remember exactly if we did the first edition.
How has it changed?
I think it's changed in many ways as the market has changed, but I think the principles of it actually probably haven't changed very much. I think that kind of bringing people to look at various art disciplines differently, or collectors of, let's say, old master paintings, looking also at contemporary art, or contemporary collectors looking also at, Asian antiquities. That has been really the guiding principle of the fair in general.
Plus, I don't have to go schlep to Maastricht in the middle of nowhere to get that experience, like 9 trains and planes
Yeah,
to have.
it's a
to have that.
complicated place to get to.
So complicated.
Maastricht, yeah.
Yes. No, thank you. Been there, done that. But you brought up a topic that we've talked about before that I think I'm going to sort of get your viewpoint on, and maybe it's a little less an issue for Frieze Masters, but the selection process for art fairs is a really non-transparent issue. Could you talk about your experience there? And I'll probably have a follow-up question or two.
My experience in the sense of, what are the criteria for, or what do you mean?
How people get chosen, they don't get chosen. Certainly when you look at, Art Basel, the getting in, not getting in can be the key to someone staying in business.
Yeah.
Frieze Masters is a little bit different, but it's still a group of galleries making selections about the business opportunities of other galleries.
Yeah. I think you have to see it more in the context of what each one of these fairs is trying to do in terms of maybe ethos. And so the selection is done according, I think, to the principles of how closely the gallery's application is to the guiding principles of the fair. And the fairs are very different. Basel is an entirely different thing to Frieze Masters, for example. So, what's interesting in this committee particularly is that because the fair shows so many different disciplines, actually the committee is very diverse. It's not people from the same field who necessarily even know each other very well. So it brings in more discussion, I think, and often I think the other disciplines sort of challenge me, for example, to justify certain decisions.
Well, I might think of it this way. It's like, because you're not an old master dealer, you can, with less conflict, be making decision about which old master dealer comes in. And old master dealers can be making more decisions about which modern dealers come in because they have less at stake. Does it happen that way at all?
I think that in each one of the fields, the kind of specialists from those fields are leading any of those decisions, but definitely you have a different perspective at play with other specialists from different fields, a little bit asking sometimes what seem like the obvious questions. But when those are asked and you have to kind of justify them, it forces a deeper discussion, I think, which is good.
Now let's talk commerce a little bit. What are you hearing on the as you walk around about, obviously the art market's been forefront in people's mind, headlines aside, in reality, business, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I think the market is softer. So it's, obviously requires all of us to do more and dig deep and, try harder. But I'm hearing good things. I saw a lot of collectors who I haven't seen, in previous years come to this fair particularly. I haven't had a chance to walk through any of the other fairs, but between 154 and PAD and Frieze London, there's a lot going on. So there's a huge amount of people coming, looking at different things.
Well, let's talk about London itself. It's like, where is London on the world map at the moment for art?
I think if you look at the museum shows, you would be hard pressed to think that there are, many better places to be, between the Van Gogh show at the National Gallery, Francis Bacon at the National Portrait Gallery.
Can you send those to New York, please?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they would be amazing. The Monet exhibition at the Courtauld is just a gem. If you haven't seen, you must go. It's such a, has all of the spirit of the Courtauld perspective in a way. And that collection is really actually should be in many ways an inspiration to collectors today, because Courtauld only collected for 10 years and look at what collection he made.
And the gallery scene here, prospering, overexpanded, Brexit hurts. I mean, there's a lot going on, Tell us the real.
There have been a lot of changes, between Brexit and COVID, but there's been also a lot of positive changes. I think that the art market here, definitely on the gallery scene, has become a little closer, a little tighter between the galleries. There's much more communication. There's a sort of a WhatsApp group of London dealers. There's much more, I think, a more coherent and tighter ecosystem. The London Gallery Weekend here, which happens once a year, is also really changed and brought, I think, a different audience to the galleries. So there's developments, like in every,
When I first started to come to London on business, my gallery in the late 80s, there were maybe, I'm not kidding, maybe 3 collectors in the country.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, you could say, well, there's Janet Green, there was Charles Saatchi, there was probably somebody else.
Yeah.
And that was, even by the beginning of Frieze opening, which is like 20 years ago, was like, well, this is a statement like, you as a Brit can do this. And because there was no contemporary collecting here,
Yeah.
was there?
But a little bit like you were saying about Maastricht, one of the great things about London is that it's a really easy place to travel to. And I think that you're right, that the scene here relies a lot on people coming from abroad. And that's a challenge, obviously. But, in a way, through the entire ecosystem, the museums, the galleries, everybody pulling together, you get.
But your point is kind of good. This has became a center of wealth from people from not England. I mean, there were tax benefits, there was wealth that could be brought in, and that changed the city, right? And the art business.
Yeah, and that changed the city. And it made it such an exciting place to be. It's so cosmopolitan. I mean, even if you look at, artists who are coming from abroad and deciding to have their studios here and live here and work here, it's very dynamic and full of interest. So
you guys do business in New York too, so
yeah.
Tell us about the difference.
Well, I think that's always been very important for us, and to have one foot here and one foot there is really at the heart of our kind of the way that we work. We work with a lot of American clients and also have great relationships with a lot of American institutions. So that's a very important part of our work. But in a sense, the program and what we do in London and in New York is at its heart the same. It's, really trying to, on the sort of behind closed doors, sell art privately of the best quality that we can get our hands on. And on the more public side, show exhibitions which relate to what we're interested in, really. Artists that we've researched a lot, moments in an artist's career that maybe have been overlooked, or maybe the market hasn't really given enough credit to, or.
It feels to me that I see, as an American, things that you bring that are European that may be more known to you, but are like, who's that person? And it's like, well, that was important arts because blah, blah. And I think there's a little sense that you bring from America things to Europe that the Europeans go, who's that?
Yeah.
Is that deliberate?
I mean, everything is deliberate yes, so it is deliberate. I think that, we follow, that's in a way the big advantage of our way of working, is that we don't represent any artists, we don't represent any estates, we don't owe anybody anything. And so
You just promised me 30,000 for being at the show.
Of course,
so
of course.
I have invoiced you.
Absolutely.
So we have that on film. She admitted it. So it's like, we sell these spots, so you are in debt to the Baer Faxt.
Exactly. But we revel a little bit in that freedom, actually. We really follow what we find to be really interesting right now. It's not a sort of, it's about what feels relevant today.
Now tell me about your view of the auction world. Did you ever work in the auction business?
For so long. I worked at Christie's and at Sotheby's.
And your partner worked there at Sotheby's.
Exactly.
And
Phillips, Deputy in Luxembourg even.
That's right.
My view on the auctions, to be fair, I haven't followed too closely this week, I have to say. The auctions are the auctions. The market is what it is. I don't know that it's, I think people like to predict doom and gloom. At the end, it seems to be pretty much okay. There were some things that even did better than people expected.
Are you finding people talking too much about the market, though?
I think that there is a tendency in a market that's, a little softer to be more fearful. And I guess that's normal. But, I think that in any sort of market ecosystem, all the players have to pull together and try to do the best. And there'll be moments of up and moments of down and moments of up and moments of down. And in a way, you have to kind of keep going.
What you said earlier, I think, is interesting, of like the notion of collaboration.
Yeah.
Seems to be what's going to have to happen. You talked about the galleries together, and now I would say New York is by nature not that collaborative in general.
Yeah.
LA's done a better job of it. And just, I was even having a conversation with somebody today of like major entities maybe have to think how we're in this together.
Yeah.
So did that come easily to everybody here to like, hey?
I don't think so. I mean, for us, first of all, collaboration is really at the heart of our business. I mean, it's called Luxembourg Co. for the reason that
You're not the co.
There is a co. There's a lot of people who are the co. There's the co of the people who work with us on a day-to-day basis. There's the co of the collectors who we're very close to. There's a co of the curators and artists who, work with us and inspire our thinking and challenge us to do things differently. So there's collaborative work is really a really important part. And I think actually it was COVID here in London that brought galleries together to a little bit start to think about, not each one for their own, but actually how can we do things together? And it's often from moments of uncertainty and sort of instability that collaboration comes. So
I'm reminded of being here, I guess it was October 2021. And that was the first time the art world came back together from COVID. And I saw something I'd never seen, which was everybody in the art world happy.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't happen. And they're like hugging and nice to see you and just happy to be out and all that. It's like, whoa, that's not you. Who are these people?
Yeah.
But that was a moment here.
Yeah, I think.
And you had a tougher lockdown than we did.
And I think that's it. I think here the experience of COVID was very difficult and the government guidelines were very difficult
I was
to
partying
understand.
with Boris, so I had no trouble when I came.
Exactly.
I flew in private. We just partied like nuts, and then,
Exactly.
But you probably didn't.
So I think that meant that, there was a need for galleries to try to understand what the regulation is, what it means, how do we implement it, and it fed into a certain collaborative spirit.
But there is a sense now, and I'm sort of like segueing from COVID of how galleries operate in the gallery model. And in our next podcast, we'll address that. Keep your eyes out for, I think, in 2 weeks about that issue, that COVID expenses went to zero and sales went up. So everybody was a genius. And we thought in 2020, everybody thought in March, April 2020, they'd be out of business by the end of the year. They had great years. And then they went through this like euphoria. And now the chickens have come home to roost a little bit in that the expenses got out of line.
Yeah. And I mean, inflation is something that's happening globally. So it's not particularly in London or particularly somewhere else.
Interest rates, inflation, all that.
And so it's tougher. And, I'm very conscious of it as, we run businesses on two sides of the Atlantic and things are more expensive to do. And so it forces you, I guess, to think more deeply.
But did you think, I better open a space in Asia and maybe we need an outpost in India?
No, I think for us, that never was really the policy. I think, the idea of how we work is about a kind of personal point of view, a more personal connection. And that's not something you can do in huge volume anyway, already between New York and London.
What do you think of the gallery model in general and what your colleagues who represent artists
so
are going through?
I think that's a different thing. I think that for some galleries representing artists means that they have to or led to open more spaces in different countries. I guess in order to keep the artists working with them. And maybe that's something that will change in the future. Maybe that will no longer be the operating model in a way. But obviously expenses, I think in whichever size your business is, are growing. And so maybe we all, maybe it will lead to people thinking and being more innovative and trying to.
Well, I may ask you one last question, but Frieze Masters, which was something that's been sort of developing over the last few years, and that's the curated sections by Sheena Wagstaff, who used to be, well, most recently was chief curator, I guess, at the Met in New York. We do have museums there. And how that section seems to become almost the focus of the fair.
It's definitely been a huge highlight.
So explain what it
the
is.
Fair.
Since you're on the selection committee.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel that you're putting me on the spot, and Sheena would be doing this so much better than me. But the idea is to bring into the fair the practice.
We have a question. Sheena from Sheffield wants to know what the best booth was there.
Ooh. I think for me, the best booth was the booth of Paula Cooper with Beatrice Caracciolo. I love her work, and I've loved it for a long time. So that's an easy one for me to pick out. But I think, if we look at the studio section, it has brought back to Frieze Masters a whole host of galleries who some did the fair in the past and some have never done the fair. And I think that kind of dialogue between more contemporary art in the context of a fair that is so diverse is really fantastic.
I've complained for years about so many one-person booths at art fairs. And then it's like, but 90% of those artists I'm not interested in. So that makes the fair much less interesting to me, because the galleries are doing this sort of commercial, like it's Tuesday, artist X, it's Wednesday, and Germany artist Y. Having some independence as a curator probably helps.
Yeah. Well, I think so.
Were you in the studio section?
We were not in the studio section, but we also did
You could have been.
We could have been, but we did also a single artist booth. And actually in a fair like Frieze Masters, which is so wide in its range, I think that doing a single artist booth is quite a good idea. Maybe not commercially.
I hated at the Art Dealers Association fair at the Armory in New York. It's like I want to see Aquavella with the Matisse, with the Cezanne, with the Jackson Pollock. I don't want to see.
You want to see a bit of everything.
I'd like to, and it's become like, because I don't like much art to begin with. So those one-person booths there don't do it for me. But.
Yeah, I understand. On the other hand, I think that for an audience, it might actually be easier. It sometimes gives you an opportunity to delve into an artist's practice, to really understand. Obviously, if you're showing Cezanne and Matisse, that's a pretty known quantity in a certain way. But
well, there is the problem that more people will see a one-person show from a gallery in New York at an art fair than I'll go in 6 weeks to the gallery.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad.
It's hard. Getting audiences in is tough. I agree. Yeah.
So last question with your London hat, sort of look into the future. What is the scene in London in the arts going to look like in 10 or 20 years?
Well, if you look, there are younger museum directors here. If you look at the new director of the British Museum, Nick Cullinan, you look at Victoria Siddall, who used to be running Frieze and is now the director of the National Portrait Gallery. I think that the scene here is getting invigorated and changed, and I think it will be very exciting here.
Well, we'll have you back on.
Yes.
I don't know that I'll be in this chair, but you can come back on and we'll go through and see what's going on here. So that brings this section of the Baer Faxt Live from. Remember, we have 2 more coming up later today. And again, thanks to Frieze for hosting us here. Thanks to Ursula and Hauser Wirth for sponsoring us. Especially thank you to Alma for giving so much of her time on a busy week in London.
Thank you.